It's the Wednesday Wisdom Show, and you want to know more about the 10 Sephirot. Hi, everyone. So last week, I talked about what the 10 Sephirot are in as sort of simple terms as I could in order to explain what they aren't. And basically, the explanation came down to this, that we have 5 senses, but those senses exist within the ego. They're all about judging what is seemingly external to us and telling us what amongst those stimuli would be beneficial to self-interest. Touch, taste, sound, smell, sight. All of them are only orientating us towards well-being in terms of self-interest. The 10 Sephirot are actually the 5 senses outside of the ego, that is in a place that takes into account the larger reality. Why 10? Well, actually, Kabbalists look at the 10 Sephirot in a different way. Real Kabbalists look at it as 5. It's Keter, Chochmah, Bina, Zeranpin, which is a collection of Sephirot, and then Malchut. And those are 5. Keter, Chochmah, Bina, Zeranpin, and then Malchut. So this is a division of the 10 Sephirot into the way that human perception is built. So this is the 5 senses outside of the ego. So some people who saw this episode got it or didn't have a lot of questions about it, and others who have experiences that are kind of moving them, confounding them, exciting them, had some questions about this concept of perception outside of the ego. Now, what I didn't do in last week's episode was I didn't really explain the methodology and the values connected with perception outside of the ego in terms of Kabbalah. Kabbalah does not break down the ego. It doesn't try to do away with the ego in any way. It doesn't actually suppress the ego. It doesn't... It uses everything that exists in our reality. It just uses it correctly and extends it. So it's not an either-or situation for a Kabbalist between perception in the 5 senses and perception in senses outside of the ego in the 10 Sephirot. What I also didn't explain particularly in that episode, though I have in probably about 10 or 15 of the 40 episodes that are online now, is what the essence of the methodology is in terms of, what does that mean to perceive on 2 levels at once and to use our egoism in a proper way in order to actually be able to naturally sense outside of ourselves. Okay? So if you have a question about the structure of all this and how it works and so on, you can go back through some of these episodes and you'll find these things, or you can also sign up for a free course. The beginning of the course is basically self-study and all that, so it's not like some kind of huge commitment on your part. And that's what these little symbols are that appear over here. They're links so that you can find out about those courses and all. So what I want to do now is I want to answer just a few questions that came in relation to the 10 Sephirot, because they're really good questions and they indicate really what needs to be clarified for people, because our very idea of what the ego is and what is outside of the ego is predicated on the perception of the ego. All of our perception, until we learn to move beyond it and include these two worlds in a conscious way in us, is all based on egoistic perception. And even people who come close to it, who start to have awakening experiences, are still perceiving everything that's occurring and evaluating it through the lens of the five senses within the ego. And that means a kind of logic and a kind of reason that appears there. The problem that we have in experiencing outside of the ego is that those sorts of perceptions are opposite to the values that exist inside of us. And the only way that we can conceive of such a thing existing is either that we seem to have like hyper-perception of some sort, as one would get under the influence of a drug, or in a kind of, in a story about heroes who have sort of superpowers or whatever. But the very essential idea of what Kabbalah is left out of that picture, because we can't conceive that there is some kind of dialogue between these two worlds. And what would that be? The methodology of Kabbalah deals with that reality that exists between the two and above, actually, the two. So I will try to get to that in some way by answering a few of these questions. Let's see. We'll start with eyes wide open. This is a long question, but it's quite interesting, so I'm going to read the whole thing. What if I actually see what nature really looks like? I see forms. I see what forms nature, how it makes clouds, the waves, everything. I see the forms, and I see how what we see is projected and formed. I see how these things form the illusion of what we see. Where do I go from here? This has happened to me naturally. No training, no religious study. And by the way, Kabbalah is not a religious study. It's a science. I also hear them talk to each other in their chirpy voices as they pretend to be crickets and birds. Lovely. I now realize that these nature creatures are formed from the shapes of the Hebrew letters, and we are the same. I see 3 or 4D. I don't know what to call it, but I see these forms in everything. I know why religions have different gods. It's because these shapes throw out plasma mists, and the shapes then either form from distinct images, or if it's something we have no knowledge of in our life, shapes are interpreted into various icons that they already worship. Some of these icons look strange because those people recorded them as they looked while performing their specific functions. Yeah, I get that. I see that all art forms have these shapes hidden in them, and I've captured them on camera. Everything does. They just don't see what is really there. I know why the Bible calls things beasts instead of animal names, because they were not referring to the animals. They were referring to what forms nature and the world and us. That's why Gilgamesh was described as a third beast, 3/4 human. Well, not exactly. We can talk about that. I see the mechanisms, parts solidified in rocks and pebbles. I can no longer look at videos and pictures without seeing these things in operation. Can anyone tell me where to go from here? Because quite frankly, I'm kind of lost, as I have no one to discuss this with, and I haven't found anyone else yet that has eyes to see. What I want to address is, where do I go from here? This part. I'm lost. I have no one to discuss this with. Where are people who see? The way in which you're describing this, you may have, what I said may have sort of triggered something in you when I opened the show last week saying people think that the 10 Sephirot are a way of looking at how things manifest in the world. And in a way, what I was pointing to when I said that was that is a kind of a misunderstanding, because the whole idea of manifestation is one, that comes from the ego, because that is not the kind of goal that will bring us to the place that you're describing that you want. The thing that we need to do is we need to learn how to turn our own quality into a quality of a desire to bestow. That can't be done by the individual. So what you're saying is, where do I go from here? I'm having these experiences. You need a teacher. I didn't have those experiences, and not everybody does, because people come to Kabbalah for different reasons. I did have experiences that I needed to understand, desires that I needed to find a correct direction for. What it really amounts to is a strong desire. And a person needs a teacher, needs methodology, and needs guidance to turn these things that seem supernatural in the language of the ego and turn them into something that is natural in terms of the real nature of spirituality, the real laws of nature. All of it, all of the handles there are in, as I said before, are in the connection with people. And it's very important to be in a correct environment in which you can begin to see all these things working as a quality of intention within you, rather than in the science fiction form that we receive them in until we come to the real work. These amazing experiences, the formations of things, even, the Hebrew letters and any of those things cannot be fulfilled in their simple forms that way. What's very true about what you wrote here is that you look at the world and you see it is filled with a quality, an amazing quality. The problem is that we need to understand that it's an opposite quality from us. We need to define that quality and find it in the natural world, because that's where it is. All that these experiences are is a calling to your heart to find the right path. And I see from what you asked that you are looking for where that is. So that means you need to find a place where you can begin to grow and integrate this into a natural structure. And to do it for the benefit, not of yourself, because that will never lead you anywhere, but to the benefit of the whole system, which you are perceiving a beautiful quality behind that system. What's that quality? If you want to know what that quality is, then you need a teacher, you need books, and you need a methodology. That's what Kabbalah offers for the person who's in, who has the intensity of desire. It may be right for you, it may not be right for you. But I found personally that when I was having experiences, the most important thing was to get the kinds of definitions that are like, where finally these kinds of things make total sense in an accessible way about how the human heart and relationships work, and that all of reality is really managed from that level, that the Creator exists not as something outside of the human, but in the connections between humans. And why wouldn't it? Because it's supposed to guide and build good for all. So it has to be on the commonality level, right? One more question, and this is from Tough and Tiny. He says, I was informed early on that your system of Kabbalah doesn't accept numerology, but I need to know why then, since numerology is based on the 10 Sephirot, and the practice of numerology works. My charts of people exactly spell out each individual as they uniquely are and could not fit anyone else. Why then is numerology not accepted? You're talking about two things, two different things. Numerology is about, what would you say, human character. Human character and how predictable human character is in terms of the destiny of a person if they don't evolve. That's numerology. Because numerology basically looks at things, quantifies, let's say, natural forces and calls them by number and so on. Yeah, there is some kind of structure to that, but that's not spirituality, right? That's materiality. That is human character according to the ego, within the ego. That's why the Bible says to Abraham, the Creator says, "I will make your numbers greater than the stars, than the number of stars." In other words, those natural systems that affect and control the ego as a mechanism and all of reality as a mechanism all exist within the will to receive. Greater than the number of stars is beyond number, beyond measure, beyond quantification, but into qualification. So qualification and the use of number is something different. That is called Gematria. Gematria is finding equivalencies between spiritual states as a person evolves. So there's a certain state of correction in a person in which they are more and more related to the system. Their desire is more and more in equivalence of form with the general quality of the Creator, which is the desire to bestow good that does good to all. So there are grades of that. We say there's 125 grades. Again, don't get caught up in the number. That has to do with the wholeness of going through 5 worlds. And I can't explain this here, but if you study, you'll find out why it's a multiple of 5, okay? So if, for instance, in Gematria, you say that the value of nature, in Hebrew, hateva, is equal to the value, numerical value of Elohim, which is the Hebrew word for God. 86. They both have 86. But here's the problem. A person has to know experientially and has to have attained and evolved to the point where they know internally what that is. Because that's an intention. It's a state of correction. So we can say that nature and God are essentially the same thing. Nature is an expression of the quality of the Creator. Not that nature is the Creator or like that, but that the forces in nature are managed by this overarching law, which is the Creator's intention towards humanity. That is qualitative. So when you look at numerology, we're talking about things we know about the human ego and the limitations of it. This is why prophets could, in the past, just by looking, they say, if things don't change, this will be the outcome. How do they know that? Because human nature is a mechanism. And if it doesn't change, you can see exactly where it's going to go, like one of those Roombas that cleans your floor. It's going to bump into something, and then it's going to reverse and go this way, and it's going to bump into that and go that way and that way and that way, and eventually it's going to fall down the stairs. So that's why prophets who were Kabbalists could see the mechanical functioning of human nature. That's what numerology is. But in order to know what's in Gematria, a person has to work with the methodology and learn these states, and then they can relate them and communicate them that way. So, again, if you want to learn more detail, like real detail, both about the method and about the technical study, which is the sort of emotional, spiritual structure of humanity and how we can live both in this world and in the world above it through the five senses and the 10 Sephirot, you need to learn. You need a teacher, you need books, and you need a methodology. And this link up here will at least give you that information.